My parents spent a fortune on a grand graduation party for my sister. But when it was my turn, they didn't even bother to show up. When I called to ask where they were, their cold reply pierced my heart. "Enjoy your community college degree, we won't be embarrassed with you." I just smiled and sent them a photo of me holding a $2.5 million check from my university partnership. They started calling nonstop. "Hi, my name is Angela Hart. I was born and raised in a middle-class family in Sacramento, in a pale yellow two-story house with a wooden fence around it and an old lemon tree standing in the corner of the yard." From the outside, everything looked picture-perfect. My father was a banker, my mother an elementary school teacher, and their income was just enough to cover our lives and even save a little for occasional weekend trips. Neighbors often said we were the ideal family. Kind parents, 2 obedient daughters, and good grades at school. But only those who lived inside that house knew the truth that the scales of affection always tilted to one side, and that side was never mine. My younger sister, Kate. From the moment she could babble, she became the center of the family. My mother would carry her into the living room, hand her a toy microphone, and let her sing a few nursery rhymes before smiling proudly and saying, "She really has an artistic gift." My father would record it on video, send it to relatives and friends, and add, "Our youngest daughter is a little star." Meanwhile, I sat quietly in the corner with my math notebook, trying to solve the extra problems my teacher had given me, hoping that one day my parents would look at my grades with the same bright pride they reserved for Kate. But the only words I ever heard from them were, "Angela, just focus on your studies, don't brag." That sentence became the refrain that haunted my childhood. Whenever guests visited, my mother would call Kate out to perform, sometimes with her toy guitar, sometimes drawing a few flowers with colored pencils. Everyone clapped, and my parents beamed with pride. And me? I was never once called out to show my straight-A report card, nor did I ever hear them tell friends that their eldest daughter had just finished 3 books in a week. I became a shadow inside my own home, a shadow constantly reminded, "Don't be a bother, don't show off." The favoritism wasn't only in words. It seeped into every small material thing in life. Kate had her own wardrobe filled with new dresses in the latest styles, while I wore hand-me-downs from relatives. My parents always found a way to justify the imbalance. They said Kate had special talents that needed nurturing. They told me I was already smart enough and didn't need anything extra. The reasoning sounded logical, but deep inside I knew it was just a way to legitimize putting the two of us on unequal scales. I never dared to fight back, because whenever I hinted at a comparison, the answer was always, "Angela, don't be selfish. You have to give in to your sister." So I stayed silent, poured everything into my studies, and believed that if I became good enough, one day those scales would finally tip toward me. But the scales never shifted. When Kate entered high school, she was given a real guitar and private music lessons. I wanted to join an advanced math program at school, but when I asked, my father only frowned and said, "That class costs money, Angela. You can just teach yourself." So I went to the library, borrowed books, and spent hours working through each problem on my own. I felt like someone walking a dark road without a lamp, relying only on sheer willpower to keep moving forward. There were nights when I sat by the window with a book, listening to the bursts of laughter from the living room where Kate and my parents were. They would watch recordings of Kate's performances at school, commenting, praising, and discussing her bright future. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, not even asked how I did on that day's test. In those moments, my heart clenched tight, but I had grown used to swallowing every feeling, used to telling myself, "Just get better, and one day they'll see." Oh well. I still remember vividly the morning of my 16th birthday, that age every girl dreams of celebrating with a special party, sweet wishes, and a warm dinner with family. I had planned it for months. I would wear the blue dress I saved up to buy from my part-time job, go with my parents and Kate to the small lakeside restaurant I had long dreamed of, blow out candles, and take pictures together. I had even handmade little invitations and placed them on the kitchen counter as a reminder. But that afternoon, while my cake was still baking in the oven, my mother received a phone call from Kate. She was crying, saying she needed a new dress for her best friend's birthday party the next day, that her old ones were out of style. I stood right beside my mother, hearing every word, hoping she would say, "We'll do that later, today is your sister's birthday." Instead, she turned to me and firmly said, "Angela, we're going shopping with your sister. Can you postpone your party a few hours? We'll be back soon." My father shut off the oven, grabbed the car keys, and hurried out without even looking at me. I stood in silence, the scent of cake slowly turning into a bitter burn, and the sound of the door slamming behind them cut through me like a cold knife. Those few hours my mother promised quickly turned into the entire evening. I sat waiting alone, the table set half-heartedly with a slightly burnt cake and a handful of small candles I had bought from the discount store. When the clock struck 8, I had no choice but to light the candles myself, softly sing happy birthday in an empty kitchen, and blow them out alone. There were no claps, no hugs, no kisses. Only a hastily scribbled card left on the table. "Sorry, honey, happy 16. I remember forcing a smile, snapping a picture of the cake, and sending it to my best friend, pretending I was happy. But inside, something shattered that could never be repaired. On the very day I should have felt the most loved, I had been pushed outside of every priority. A year later came the state science fair. It was the first time I felt I had a real chance to prove myself. My project, a simple AI model that sorted trash for recycling, was selected to represent my school. I worked endlessly for weeks, skipping meals, falling asleep over my desk, perfecting every detail. When the judges announced I had won first place, I was shaking so hard I could barely stand. In my mind, I pictured my parents in the audience, clapping, their eyes glowing with pride. I had sent invitations weeks in advance, reminding them again and again that this was the most important event of my entire high school life. But that morning, as I buttoned my white shirt and prepared to leave, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother. "Kate has a slight cold. We don't feel comfortable leaving her alone. Please understand." I froze at the doorway, my chest hollow. So when I walked onto the stage to receive my award, the bright lights shone down, the audience cheered, the applause was deafening, but the faces I searched for were nowhere to be found. I held the trophy, bowed in thanks, but my vision blurred with tears. While other students hugged their parents and posed for happy family photos, I slipped quietly backstage, clutching the trophy as if it could fill the aching emptiness inside me. That evening, when I returned home, the whole family was gathered watching television. Kate was eating porridge, giggling as my parents doted on her. I placed the trophy on the table, but no one even looked at it. My father only muttered casually, "Yeah, good. Now focus on your exams." Those 2 moments, my 16th birthday spent alone, and the science award won with no one there to witness, were like twin blades carved deep into my memory. They became scars that would never heal. Reminders that in every circumstance I had never been the first choice. I realized I would forever be the extra, a name never spoken in my parents' proud stories. And in that very moment, I made a silent vow. If my family could not see me, then I would make the entire world see me. I knew I could not rely on my parents, nor could I wait for a miracle to change the way they saw me. The only way to step out of Kate's shadow was to create my own path. I did not have the financial means to go directly to a top university, but I found a way forward. Enrolling in community college with the plan to transfer later to the University of California, Berkeley, the place I had long admired for its artificial intelligence research program. When I held the acceptance letter from community college in my hands, I told myself that this would be the beginning of a difficult journey, but at least it would be mine, no longer dependent on anyone's permission or colored by their dismissive stares. The first days at community college were exhausting. By day, I attended classes in math, programming, and core subjects. By night, I worked shifts in the school's AI lab. At first, my job was only data entry, organizing research materials, assisting graduate students with their numbers. But to me, it was a doorway into the world I longed for. I often sat silently behind them, observing each line of code running, each algorithm being tested. Many nights I left the lab past midnight, the icy wind from the bay cutting through my thin jacket. And yet, strangely, I did not feel weary. Instead, there was a quiet warmth inside me, as if for the first time my efforts had meaning, even if it was only a recognition that came from within myself. I learned how to handle everything on my own. Tuition, books, living expenses, all of it was my responsibility. I hunted down every small scholarship, every bit of financial aid I could find. I remember once seeing an announcement for a scholarship on green innovation. I stayed up 3 nights straight writing a proposal for a project called AI for Green Energy Management, a small model designed to optimize electricity use in buildings. I didn't dare hope for much, but when the acceptance email came, offering a modest grant that covered part of my tuition, I broke down crying right there in the library. It was the first time I felt I could turn my effort into something tangible without anyone standing behind me to hold me up. That very project brought me closer to dedicated mentors. Professor Miller, one of the first to notice my persistence, asked me, "Angela, would you like to join the official research group? I think you have real potential, you just need more opportunities." I nodded without hesitation. From then on, I became part of a small team, testing new ideas, debating, and learning. For the first time, I was no longer Kate's shadow, but a true member of something bigger. Every time Professor Miller patted my shoulder and said, "Good job," it felt like another small tear in my heart had been stitched closed. And yet, the distance with my family never closed. Whenever I called home, the conversation always circled back to Kate. Kate was just chosen as leader of her music club. Kate has an upcoming performance. Kate is thinking of buying a new car. I would sit silently, holding the phone, answering briefly with, "Yeah," or "I understand," before hanging up. No one ever asked if I was tired, how my project was going, or whether I had enough money for rent. Eventually, I learned not to expect it. But that very abandonment became my fuel. I threw myself into classes, into research, telling myself that if my family didn't want to see me, then I would make the world out there have no choice but to. I applied to scientific conferences, sent cold emails to experts I admired, volunteered for unpaid internships just to gain more experience. Every time I achieved a small step forward, I recorded it in my notebook, treating it as a reminder that I was moving ahead little by little, but always forward. When I completed 2 years at community college and was officially accepted to transfer to UC Berkeley, I broke down crying right there in the registrar's office. It wasn't just an admission letter, it was proof that I had chosen the right path, that every sleepless night in the lab and every coin I saved from part-time jobs had not been in vain. I remember calling home with excitement in my voice to share the news, but my parents simply replied, "Good. That means we don't have to worry about your tuition anymore." I went silent, my hand tightening around the phone. They didn't know that those words hurt more than any slap could. But I also realized something. I was used to it by now. My days at Berkeley marked a true turning point. I was immersed in a world-class research environment surrounded by talented students from across the globe. At first, I felt intimidated, convinced that as a transfer from community college I would be looked down on. But when I presented my AI for Green Energy Management project during my first group meeting and saw everyone listening intently, asking questions, even suggesting improvements, I knew I had found my place. I was no longer an outsider. I was part of the real game. The success was modest at first, but my efforts gradually earned recognition. Mentors began introducing me to small businesses and green startup funds. I was invited to speak at a tech conference in San Francisco, standing before hundreds of people to share my ideas. When I stepped down to the sound of applause, it wasn't because I was Kate's sister, but because I was Angela Hart, a young student bold enough to dream and to act. That night, I walked alone across the bridge, the wind whipping my hair, and a pride unlike anything I had ever known surged inside me. I knew I was finally stepping out of my family's shadow, that through nothing but self-reliance I was writing my own story. Graduation day arrived faster than I expected. I had prepared for it over 4 years through sleepless nights in the lab, through part-time shifts that lasted past midnight, through efforts that had never once earned a word of praise from my parents. And yet, inside me, a small hope still lingered, the same hope of a child whose parents never showed up to school performances. That today, when I walked across the stage, the 3 VIP seats in the front row would be filled by my parents and my sister Kate. I had carefully reserved those seats weeks in advance, sent invitations, maps to the parking lot, even texted reminders of the time and place. I wanted to leave them no excuse to miss it. As I sat in front of the mirror adjusting my graduation cap, a memory suddenly pulled me back to the previous year, on the day of Kate's high school graduation. That day, my parents had turned it into an event as grand as a wedding. They rented a luxury hotel in downtown Sacramento, built an outdoor stage, and invited nearly the entire extended family and their friends. Fireworks lit up the sky, a live band played all night, and even local reporters showed up to cover it. Kate wore a white dress and walked out like a star, while my parents moved proudly from table to table, introducing her. "This is our golden daughter, she will bring glory to our family." I still remember standing in the corner of the ballroom, wearing a simple dress I had bought with my own part-time earnings, holding a glass of water, trying to blend into the crowd while feeling utterly hollow inside. No one noticed me, as if my very existence was nothing more than a backdrop for Kate's brilliance. Thinking about that, I sighed and told myself, today will be different. I believed that no matter how biased my parents were, a graduation ceremony was something they could not possibly miss. But that morning, just as I had finished getting ready, my phone buzzed. I opened it to see a short message. "We don't want to be embarrassed by a community college degree. Just enjoy it yourself." I stood frozen in my small rented room, the graduation cap trembling in my hand. I read the words again and again, hoping I had misread them, but each letter stabbed coldly into my heart. I was used to favoritism, used to neglect, but in the most important moment of my life, they still chose denial and worse, contempt. Tears threatened to fall, but I bit my lip hard. I had promised myself that no matter what happened, I would not cry today. I walked into the campus, surrounded by laughter and the colors of flowers. Students were everywhere with their families, carrying bouquets, balloons, and cameras. Mothers hugged their children tightly, fathers patted their shoulders with pride. I clutched my bag close, forcing my steps to stay steady. As I passed the VIP row, my eyes went immediately to the 3 empty seats. A small white card labeled Heart Family had been blown to the ground by the wind. I bent down to pick it up, placed it carefully back on the chair, and sat upright. That small gesture felt like my way of resisting the wave of disappointment that threatened to pull me under. The music began, and the ceremony started. One by one, students' names were called, each followed by thunderous applause from the family section. I watched as my friends embraced their parents, exchanging vibrant bouquets of flowers. Andrew, my lab partner, walked up beaming as his whole family leapt to their feet, clapping wildly. Maria, my closest friend in the program, received a bouquet nearly as tall as she was from her mother, whose face glowed with pride. And then there was me, sitting quietly, eyes avoiding the stares that occasionally drifted toward the 3 empty seats in my row. As the ceremony drew toward its close, the silver-haired dean stepped onto the stage. His warm, resonant voice filled the microphone, reflecting on the achievements of the class and the hard work of the students. Then he paused, his gaze landing directly on my section. "And now," he announced, "we are honored to recognize a remarkable achievement. Student Angela Hart, from the Computer Science Department, has developed an AI project for green energy management. This project has just been signed into a commercial partnership worth $2.5 million with a major technology corporation." In that instant, the entire hall went silent as if to absorb every word, then erupted like thunder. Applause, whistles, cheers filled the air. Cameras swung toward me, my face lighting up the massive LED screen overhead. I stood, my heart racing, but my smile steady. Walking to the stage, I shook the dean's hand and accepted the oversized check with 2,500,000, printed boldly across it. He leaned in and whispered, "You've done wonderfully, Angela." I only managed a small nod, my vision blurring not with tears, but with overwhelming emotion. Flashes burst across the room, capturing every angle. I turned back toward the hall, seeing hundreds of faces fixed on me. The 3 empty seats in the front row still stood out, stabbing like a scar in my chest. But for the first time, their absence no longer broke me. Instead, it made me stand taller, as if declaring to the world that I could shine on my own, without anyone behind me. I bowed my head, and the applause swelled again, crashing like ocean waves. When I returned to my seat, my hands were still trembling as I held the check. Pulling out my phone, I snapped a clear photo and sent it straight into the family group chat. The message showed "delivered," and almost instantly my phone buzzed nonstop. Mom and Dad lit up on the screen, the calls flashing one after another. I stared at it vibrating in my hand, a storm of emotions rising inside me, bittersweet, yet triumphant. For years I had longed for a congratulatory call. And now, when it finally came, I realized I no longer needed it. I set the phone down on the table, a faint smile forming on my lips. The auditorium still echoed with applause for the students after me, but, for me, my moment had already closed, a moment I knew I would never forget. That night, I returned to my small rented room, still clutching my diploma and a copy of the oversized check. My body was exhausted, but inside me swirled a mix of pride and emptiness. When the lights of the ceremony faded and the applause subsided, silence surrounded me. I brewed a cup of hot tea, placed it on the table, and sank into the old chair. And, just as I had expected, my phone lit up again, vibrating insistently as if trying to tear apart the quiet. Mom and Dad appeared on the screen, accompanied by a relentless ringtone. I stared at it for a few seconds, hesitated, and finally pressed answer. My parents' faces filled the video call screen. My mother wore silk pajamas, her makeup light but still keeping her usual neatness. My father sat beside her, eyes fixed directly on the camera. They both forced a strained smile. "Congratulations, Angela." My mother began, her voice strangely sweet. "I watched part of the live stream. You really surprised us." I sat still, took a sip of tea, felt the mint aroma spread, and nodded softly. "Thank you." Before I could say more, my father cut in, his tone steady as if reading from a script. "You've really grown up. We're very proud of you." For a fleeting moment, I almost let my heart soften. For years, I had waited to hear those 2 words, "proud of you," and when they came, my chest tightened, like a child being soothed at last. But the comfort didn't last long. After a few polite exchanges, the conversation quickly shifted. My mother leaned forward, her eyes lighting up as if she had been waiting for this chance. "Angela, you know Kate is graduating soon. She has so many business ideas, but to start, she needs capital. Now that you have $2.5 million, you should share some with your sister so she can launch her career." I set my teacup down and drew in a deep breath. I had predicted this moment, but hearing it spoken aloud still sent an icy chill through me. "I just graduated today," I said slowly. "That money is the result of 4 years of relentless work. I wrote the proposal myself, earned the scholarships myself, signed the contract myself. During all of that, did either of you ever contribute a single dollar to me? I'm willing to guide Kate with her ideas, help her plan a business strategy, but money, number Z." My father's brow furrowed, his voice dropping low. "Do you hear yourself? You sound selfish. Have you forgotten who raised you? Who put food on the table and a roof over your head? We gave you an education. And now that you finally have money, you turn your back on your family?" A bitter laugh escaped me, one with no joy at all. "Raised me? Were you ever truly there for me in the moments that mattered? On my 16th birthday, I sat alone with a cold cake. The day I won the state science fair, you stayed home because Kate had a cold. On prom night, Kate rode in a limousine while I walked. How many more examples do you need me to list? I was never your priority. And now, when I finally have something that belongs to me, all you see is a bank account you can funnel into her. My mother's face paled, then tightened into a frown. You're so ungrateful. Without us, how could you have studied at all? How dare you throw such cruel words at us? Kate's face suddenly appeared in the frame, her curled hair falling over her shoulders, her eyes red and watery as if she were about to cry. Angela, she said, her voice breaking. You know how hard things are for me. I just need one chance. You already have everything, and I have nothing. Please, help me. Don't you love me? I looked at her face, and in an instant, my entire childhood replayed before me. All the times I had been told to give up what was mine, to give up opportunities, to give up even my parents' attention. And now, when I finally had something of my own, they wanted me to give that up too. I shook my head firmly, my voice steady. No, Kate, loving you does not mean sacrificing myself. If you truly want to start a business, then start from nothing. Learn to stand on your own, just like I did. The three of them were silent for a few seconds. Then my father slammed his hand against the table so hard the sound carried through the screen. Selfish. You think just because you're clever and made a little money, you can lecture this family? You owe us. You owe us for giving you life. I stared straight into the camera so he could see my eyes were no longer trembling. Number, I don't owe you anything. The only debt I have is to myself, to the sleepless nights I endured alone, to the tears I swallowed in silence, to the wounds you left behind. I carried it all by myself, and now, I will decide my own path. I will not hand over a cent to this family to cover for mistakes that were never mine. The air in the call grew heavy, every breath turning into shards of glass cutting against the skin. My mother's eyes widened, her lips trembling but unable to form words. Kate broke down in sobs, while my father shook his head, his gaze filled with both anger and helplessness. You've changed, Angela, he said, his voice tight with strain. You're not the daughter we knew anymore. I nodded slowly, my tone calm. Yes, I've changed. Because if I hadn't, I would still be buried under Kate's shadow and your neglect. And I will never allow that to continue. I pressed the button to end the call. The screen went black, reflecting back my own face, trembling with both fury and release. I leaned against the chair, taking a long breath. Their accusations still echoed in my mind: selfish, ungrateful, betraying the family. But deep inside, I knew I had done the right thing. For the first time in my life, I had drawn a clear boundary. I owed them nothing. I was no longer the obedient shadow who accepted unconditional sacrifice. I was myself, and I had the right to hold on to what I had earned. That night, I sat watching the distant San Francisco skyline, the lights flickering like 1,000 stars. My old wounds were still there, but alongside them was something new, a strength I had never felt before, the strength of someone who dared to stand up and say no. And I knew this confrontation was only the beginning of battles still to come. After that tense video call, I sat in silence for a long time in my small room. The blue glow of my phone screen still burned in my eyes, along with those words that kept echoing. Selfish, ungrateful. You owe us. I had heard them so many times, from childhood up until now, but this time they no longer crushed me. Instead, they made me see the truth. If I didn't set boundaries, if I didn't finally say everything out loud, the cycle would never end. They would keep calling me ungrateful every time I refused to sacrifice for Kate, and I would forever be their puppet, strings pulled at will. I could not live that way anymore. I opened my laptop, the screen lighting up the quiet room. I placed my hands on the keyboard, my heart pounding. I knew that once I pressed send, there would be no turning back. But I also knew that if I stayed silent, I would only prolong the suffering. I drew a deep breath, then began to type. The words poured out freely, no longer tangled, as if they had been waiting inside me for years. Dear Mom and Dad, I began. First of all, I want to thank you for giving me life and raising me. I will never deny the debt of being born, and I will always be grateful for that. But there is something I have held inside for too long. I can no longer accept being compared or taken advantage of. Throughout my childhood and youth, I was always placed second, always asked to give everything up for Kate. I stayed silent, endured, pushed myself to study hard in the hope that one day you would finally see me. But time after time, what I received in return was indifference, even contempt. And now, when I have finally achieved something on my own, you still refuse to see it as my effort, and only look at it as an opportunity to provide more for Kate. I cannot accept that anymore. 1. I paused, quickly wiping my tears. Old memories flooded back, the cold birthday cake, the award no one witnessed, the lonely prom night. They urged me to keep writing. I placed my hands back on the keyboard. From now on, every decision about my finances, my career, and my life will be mine alone. I will not give money to Kate or anyone else to compensate for the favoritism you've always shown her. I do not refuse to help her with knowledge, advice, or guidance if she genuinely wants to learn. But I will not sacrifice the fruits of my own labor just to sustain that bias. I have learned to stand on my own, and I will continue to do so. This is not selfishness. This is my right to live the life I have worked so hard to build. I typed on, each word slicing through the invisible chains that had bound me for so many years. I hope you can understand this decision, though I know it may be difficult. You may feel angry, disappointed, or believe that I've changed. But the truth is, I had to change. Because if I didn't, I would remain buried under Kate's shadow, and I would lose myself completely. I don't want to live like that anymore. I have chosen my own path, and I will follow it through to the end. When finally, I closed the email with a message both clear and resolute. I love you in the way a child can still love, but that love does not mean I will allow myself to be hurt forever. If you truly want to maintain this relationship, it will have to be built on mutual respect, not one-sided demands. If you only reach out to ask for money for Kate, then please understand that I will not respond. I hope this email can mark the beginning of change, if not for you, then at least for me. I reread every line, made a few edits, and then sat still. The room was so silent I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. I knew that with a single click, I would close an entire chapter of my life. Closing my eyes, I drew a deep breath, then moved the cursor to send. One soft click and it was gone. In that moment, I felt as though I had lost something, but at the same time gained something far more precious. It was like closing a heavy, rusted door that had been stuck for years, and opening a new one filled with light. I didn't know how my parents would react, perhaps with anger, perhaps with silence, or perhaps with even harsher accusations. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because, for the first time, I had said clearly what I wanted. I owed them nothing. A few weeks later, another door opened. An offer for a full-time position at a tech startup in San Francisco, one of the direct partners of the project I had developed at Berkeley. I packed my things, left behind the old rented room, and drove along Highway 80 with a mix of anxiety and excitement. As the skyline of San Francisco slowly rose before me, the afternoon sun glinting off the shimmering waters of the bay, I felt as though I was stepping into an entirely new chapter of life, a chapter I would hold the pen to write. My first apartment in the Mission Bay district was small, just enough space for a bed, a desk, a bookshelf, and a little kitchen corner. But the large window opened straight onto the bay, and every morning when I pulled back the curtains, I was greeted by sunlight dancing on the water, the calls of seagulls, and the salty breeze rushing in. There were no more comparisons, no more cold stares waiting to judge me. There was only me, a small room, and the belief that I could begin again. On my first day at work, I walked into the startup's office, a bright open space with long desks, glowing computer screens, and walls covered in sketches and brainstorming charts. My new colleagues, mostly young engineers passionate about technology, welcomed me with warm smiles. No one asked where I had studied, no one cared that I had once started at community college. They only cared about the code I wrote and the ideas I shared. The work at the startup was so intense that I often lost track of time. In the mornings, I was caught up in sprint meetings. In the afternoons, I spent hours analyzing data, and at night, I wrote code for new modules. But instead of exhaustion, I felt alive. Each time an algorithm ran successfully, Each time an idea of mine was accepted for testing, it felt as though I was laying down one more brick for the future I was building. Outside of work, I found another meaningful pursuit, mentoring a group of high school girls who loved STEM. At first, I only planned to attend a few sessions to share my experiences, but the more I became involved, the more joy I found in watching them stumble through their very first lines of code, or seeing their eyes light up when a small robot they had built actually moved. One of the girls once asked me, "Angela, have you ever been afraid you weren't good enough?" I smiled, held her hand, and answered, "I used to feel that fear every single day. But then I realized fear doesn't stop you from moving forward. The only thing you need to do is to keep going." Little by little, I built a new family around me. This family wasn't bound by blood, but by choice. Colleagues who stayed late at night to help me fix stubborn lines of code, young students who looked at me with admiration. New friends in San Francisco who invited me to run along the bay every weekend. They didn't demand my sacrifice, they didn't compare me to anyone else. They accepted me fully, exactly as I was. In the evenings, after work, I often sat by the window of my apartment, watching the city lights shimmer on the water, listening to the steady rhythm of the waves. I no longer thought much about my parents or Kate. The accusatory calls, the words ungrateful and selfish, had become distant echoes, fading into the background. In their place, I felt a fullness of freedom. The freedom to choose my own path, the freedom to keep what I had earned, the freedom to live without needing my family's validation. One evening, I went out with my colleagues for dinner at a small restaurant by the bay. We laughed over silly coding errors, shared dreams of building products that could change the market. As I looked around the table, it struck me. This was the celebration I had always wished for on my 16th birthday, not extravagant, not showy, but filled with warmth and respect. And in that moment, I realized I had finally found my true family, one that didn't need blood to bind us, only genuine hearts. After months of slowly reclaiming peace in my new life in San Francisco, I had begun to believe my family would finally let me go, that they would stop trying to cling to me or force responsibilities onto me that had never truly been mine. Work at the startup was thriving, my STEM mentees were more connected than ever, and my chosen family had become a steady source of strength. But I had underestimated the power of desperation, and sometimes desperation can be stronger than anger. One weekend afternoon, just as I returned from the lab carrying a box of pizza to eat alone, there came a pounding at my door so hard the walls shook. I thought for a moment it might be a neighbor in need, but when I opened the door, the sight froze me in place. My parents stood there, their faces gaunt and worn compared to the last time I had seen them. My mother wore a faded sweater, her hair greasy and unkempt. My father looked thin and hollow-eyed. Behind them stood Kate, her eyes red and swollen, stripped of the pride she once carried, replaced now only by exhaustion and despair. "We need to talk, Angela," my father said, his voice hoarse and stripped of the usual authority. My mother looked at me with pleading eyes, while Kate kept her head bowed, tears threatening to fall. I drew in a long breath, then stepped aside, opening the door wide. "Come in." The small apartment instantly felt cramped with the three of them inside. I poured tea and set the cups before them. They sat on the sofa, their hands twisted together, the air so heavy it seemed a single breath might shatter it. My father finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Angela, I made bad investments. All of our savings are gone. The bank is about to foreclose on the house. Your mother, she hasn't been able to sleep for weeks from the worry. And Kate is unemployed. She hasn't been able to find work after graduation. We have nothing left." "Okay, My mother broke down, her hands shaking as she clutched the teacup without drinking. "Angela, you're our only hope. If you don't help us, we'll lose everything. We're family. Blood can't abandon blood." Kate raised her head too, her voice choking with sobs. "Please, Angela, I have nothing left. I don't know what to do." I sat in silence, listening to every word, my gaze moving from father to mother, and finally resting on Kate. My heart ached. I was not cold-blooded. Even after all the hurt, I could still feel the raw desperation in their voices. But at the same time, memories surged back. The birthdays spent alone, the empty chairs at my graduation, the cruel rumors they had spread. And I knew with piercing clarity, if I yielded today, every boundary I had fought so hard to build would crumble. I set my teacup down on the table, my voice calm but firm. I'm sorry for what's happening. But I cannot, and will not, pay for mistakes I didn't make. I've lived on my own. I've built everything I have today with my own hands. I was dismissed, abandoned, treated like an outsider for years. And now, when I finally have a measure of success, I'm being asked to sacrifice it all to fix the family's failures. I won't do it anymore. My father's face tightened, his words cutting. Angela, how dare you turn your back on your own blood? Do you think your money will protect you forever? People will laugh at you when they learn you abandoned your family. My mother's voice rose to a scream. You're an ungrateful daughter. No one does this to their parents. Kate collapsed into sobs, falling to her knees at my side. Please, Angela, I can't take this anymore. I'll die if you don't help me. I drew a long breath, then stood up and walked to the door. I turned the lock and pulled it open, letting the hallway air rush into the apartment. Looking back at them one last time, I spoke with steady clarity. I'm not turning my back, I'm holding my boundary. I don't owe you, and I don't owe Kate. I owe only myself, my effort, my wounds, all the burdens I carried alone. I hope you can understand, but if you don't, then there is nothing more to say. In that moment, the room seemed to split apart with the weight of contradiction. My father's face flushed red, so enraged he could no longer find words. My mother clutched her chest, trembling, her eyes burning with fury. Kate's sobs grew louder, echoing in the small apartment. I stood at the open door, one hand resting on the knob, as steady as an unspoken declaration. The conversation was over. At last, my father pulled my mother to her feet, his voice low and seething. You'll regret this, Angela. One day, you'll realize you have no one left. My mother only wept, casting me a look as sharp as a blade. Kate stumbled after them, still choking on tears. I didn't respond. I only held my calm gaze, silently watching them leave. When the door closed and their footsteps faded down the hall, the apartment fell back into quiet. I leaned back against the door and let out a long breath. What I felt wasn't triumph, but a deep sense of release. I knew I had just cut the last cord tying me to them. There was no going back. And strangely, instead of fear, I felt lighter, as if I had finally set down a burden I'd been carrying my whole life. That night, I sat on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer across the surface of the bay. I sipped my tea, listened to the distant waves, and felt a calmness inside. My blood family had rejected me long ago, and now they had sealed the last door themselves. But I wasn't alone. I had my job, my friends, my students who looked at me with bright eyes and called me Miss Angela. I had another kind of family, the family I chose, and that family had never let me down. After that confrontation in my apartment, I thought everything was over. I had drawn my boundary, I had opened the door and shown them out, leaving behind a silence that was final. I believed that from then on, they would give up, that they would finally accept the truth that I was no longer their backup bank to rescue them from their mistakes. But I was wrong. When they couldn't move me with tears or pleas, they chose another weapon, slander and destruction. The first rumor came from an aunt in Sacramento. One evening she called me, her voice sharp with doubt. Angela, I heard you didn't actually create that AI project. People are saying you stole the idea from the lab and took all the credit for yourself. Is it true? I froze, my hand gripping the phone so tightly it hurt, my whole body going cold. She didn't say exactly who people were, but I knew. No one else could have planted that but my parents and Kate. In the days that followed, the rumors spread faster than I ever imagined. Relatives whispered that I was cold-blooded, ungrateful, got rich and turned my back on my parents. An uncle who had once been kind to me even sent a message, "You shouldn't have done this." If you have money but abandon your family, no one will respect you. I bit my lip until it bled, knowing I couldn't possibly explain myself to everyone. Worse still, the whispers began to leak into my work. One morning, when I walked into the startup office, Andrew, my closest friend and longtime colleague, looked at me with an uneasy expression. "Belle," he said quietly, "I heard some people outside saying your AI project wasn't entirely your own, that you used lab data and then took private money from the company. I don't believe it, but do you know where this is coming from?" I nodded, forcing a faint smile. "I know. And I'll handle it." But inside, a fire of rage flared so hot it made me tremble. I knew that silence meant consent. If I let the rumors linger, not only my reputation but my entire career could collapse. So I began gathering every piece of evidence: email exchanges with Professor Miller, copyright filings, the signed contract with the tech corporation, and the grant proposal I had written word by word. Each document, each number felt like a brick fortifying the wall that would shield me against their lies. I arranged a meeting with Professor Miller, who had guided me through the entire research journey. After listening to my story, he sat in silence for a long moment before nodding firmly. "Angela, you've endured more than enough. Don't worry, I'll testify. The truth will defend you." Andrew immediately signed a statement confirming my role in the project. Several other colleagues, once they learned what was happening, volunteered to stand with me as well. My eyes burned, not out of weakness, but because for the first time, I felt clearly that I was not alone. Once I had the full file, I turned to one of the best attorneys in San Francisco, Rachel Klein, a specialist in defamation cases. Her office was bright and orderly, shelves lined with thick case files. I laid everything out for her, leaving nothing unsaid. Rachel listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, then looked me in the eye and said, "What they've done meets every condition for defamation. Angela, you're not only protecting yourself, you're sending a message that the truth cannot be twisted. I'll represent you." Hearing those words, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The lawsuit was filed, and it quickly drew public attention. Local media called it an unprecedented family war. Daughter sues parents and sister for defamation. Reactions flooded in. Some criticized me. "They're still your parents. How could you drag them into court?" But many more messages came from strangers sharing their own stories, how they too had been victims of favoritism and manipulation, and they told me they stood with me in my fight for justice. On the day of the hearing, my heart pounded like a drum. The courtroom was packed: reporters, colleagues, even a few relatives. My parents sat on the defendant's side, Kate beside them, her face pale. They had hired a young lawyer who tried to argue that Angela's success was built on the foundation her family provided, on their early support. But when the judge asked, "Do you have any evidence that she stole ideas?" the room fell silent. My father stammered, We heard it from acquaintances, we suspected." The judge's brows furrowed. Suspicion is not evidence. On my side, a line of witnesses stood ready. Professor Miller took the stand first, his voice steady and resonant. "This AI project originated from Angela's idea. I oversaw every step. She worked relentlessly for years, and every dataset, every algorithm was built legitimately by her. There was no theft here." Then Andrew came forward, his tone firm and unwavering. "Without Angela, our team would never have come this far. She was the leader, she was the heart of the project." Hearing their words, I wanted to cry and to scream all at once. Not out of weakness, but because at last, my work was being recognized in the open, undeniable, and clear for all to see. The trial lasted 2 days. When the judge finally read the verdict, my entire body shook. The court finds the defendants Mr. and Mrs. Hart and Kate Hart guilty of defamation, of spreading false information that caused serious damage to the honor and reputation of the plaintiff, Angela Hart. The defendants are ordered to issue a public apology to the plaintiff through media and community channels, and to provide symbolic financial compensation for emotional damages. The words struck me like lightning, but this time, it was the lightning of release. I had won. I had defended the truth, and I had defended my name. On the other side, my family bowed their heads in silence. Kate wept uncontrollably, my mother covered her face, and my father stared down at the floor, his face ashen. News of the ruling spread quickly. Those who had once believed the false rumors shifted their tone, sending messages of apology. My colleagues organized a small celebration, raising glasses in my honor. Your reputation is stronger than ever now. I laughed, and for the first time in months, it was a laugh that came from deep within. For my parents and Kate, it was different. They lost the trust of relatives, neighbors, even those who once defended them. The words they had sown turned back on them like blades. They had tried to destroy me, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. The day after the court's verdict, I returned to my small apartment in Mission Bay carrying a sense of relief I hadn't known in years. The room was the same, bookshelves filled with files, a wooden desk by the window, the little balcony that looked out over the bay. But everything seemed brighter, more open, because I knew there was no longer a dark cloud hanging over me. I carried a cup of hot tea out to the balcony, sat in my familiar chair, and let the salty wind brush against my face. In the distance, the Golden Gate Bridge stood tall in the glow of sunset, its red arches reflecting off the rippling water. As I looked out at the scene, memories rushed back like a film playing in reverse. I saw the cold 16th birthday cake, the candle burning low in an empty kitchen as I blew it out alone. I saw the brightly lit auditorium where I had won the state science fair and the empty seats below where I had once hoped my parents would sit. I saw prom night, Kate stepping out of a limousine in flashing camera lights while I walked home in a frayed dress and scuffed shoes. I saw the 3 vacant seats at graduation, the Hart family card blown to the floor, and the cruel message. Enjoy your community college degree, we won't be embarrassed with you. And later, the lies, the rumors that spread like wildfire. All of it had once felt like knives cutting into me, but now, looking back, they were only scars. Scars that remained, but no longer hurt, only reminders that I had lived, endured, and moved forward. A few weeks after the legal victory, I accepted an invitation to appear on a talk show about women in technology. Under the bright studio lights, I listened as the host asked, "Angela, what is the greatest lesson you've learned from this journey?" I smiled, looked straight into the camera, and answered with calm certainty. Recognition is not something you beg for. You give it to yourself. If you only wait for others to see you, you'll be stuck in a race for acceptance. But if you give yourself value, no one can take it away. For a moment, the audience fell silent, then the room filled with thunderous applause. I saw women in the crowd wiping away tears, and I knew the message had reached them, the very words I once wished someone had said to me years ago. When the talk show aired, hundreds of messages poured in from across the world. From New York, from Texas, even from women in Europe and Asia who wrote, "I, too, once sat alone with a cold birthday cake. I, too, graduated with no family there to watch." They shared their stories and thanked me for daring to speak mine. I read every line, my heart aching yet warm, because I realized I was no longer alone. My story had become part of a larger story, a story of thousands of others searching for their worth again after the wounds of family. Life in San Francisco went on, but I felt different. In the mornings, I went to work, blending into the vibrant energy of the startup, building new ideas alongside my colleagues. In the evenings, I returned to my mentoring class for high school girls in STEM, watching their eyes light up when code finally ran, when a small robot rolled forward on its own. One girl once asked me, "Angela, were you ever afraid you weren't good enough?" I smiled and answered, "I used to feel that fear every single day, but fear never stops you from moving forward. The only thing you need to do is keep going." Watching them grow each day, I saw myself in them, only this time, I was the one giving the recognition I never had. Friends, colleagues, students, they had become my chosen family. We ate dinners at small restaurants by the bay, laughing over silly coding mistakes, sharing dreams and failures. In them, I found what my blood family had never given me: respect, listening, and love without conditions. I understood now that family is not just blood. Family is the people who choose to stand beside you, lift you up, and see your worth even when you can't see it yourself. At the end of the talk show, I sent one final message to the audience. If you've ever been abandoned by your own family, remember this: you are not alone. Your worth is not in their eyes. It is in you, in every effort, every stumble, every time you stood back up. Give yourself the recognition you deserve. And tell me, have you ever felt that way? Where are you watching this from? I smiled, knowing that question would travel far, reaching millions who needed to hear it. One afternoon, after leaving the office, I drove out to the Golden Gate Bridge. The sky was burning red, the sun falling over the water in a brilliant streak of light. I rolled down the window, let the wind whip through my hair, the sound of waves rising from the bay below. In the rearview mirror, the city of San Francisco glittered behind me, ahead stretched an endless road. The bridge was no longer just a landmark, it was proof of what I had become. Freedom, rebirth, and the beginning of a new journey. I smiled, and this time it was no longer the forced smile of someone abandoned, but the calm smile of a woman who had finally found herself. I knew challenges still lay ahead, but I was no longer afraid. I had endured the worst, fought back, and reclaimed my dignity. Now, I didn't need permission or recognition from anyone. I had given myself value, and that is something no one could ever take away. The car sped forward through the blazing sunset. Wind tangled in my hair, the water beneath the bridge shone like fire. I let myself sink into that moment, the moment of freedom and rebirth. And I whispered to myself, this is my life, and only I have the right to write what comes next.